Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I am always so excited to introduce to you as my guests people who are committed to their own growth and development and also to the development of the people who are in their organizations. And that's really the purpose of my company, the sponsor of my show, Grow Strong Leaders. We are committed to the growth and development of leaders at all levels of an organization, and we have created resources that can be used to help people communicate more effectively and connect with each other at work. And you can find out more at growstrongleaders.com. Today, I have a guest who really is such a great example of the kind of guest that I love to bring to you as my audience. His name is Maurice, or Mo, Rondeau, and I'd love to welcome you to my show, Mo.
Thanks, Meredith.
Mo is the Vice President of Learning and Development at WinnCompanies, and that's a real estate property development and management company in the Boston area. He has a diverse 25-plus year background in global learning and organizational development. So he's all about the people side of business, and his multi-industry experience provides him with a solid understanding of the challenges that business leaders face in engaging and also retaining their talent. So, Mo, I am so looking forward to this conversation today. And before we jump into all the questions that I have for you, I gave just a little bit of information about your wonderful career. Give us some of the highlights about your journey.
Sure, Meredith, thank you. So I graduated from graduate school in the middle of a recession and was passionate about learning and development at that point, and found myself in the healthcare software industry, and spent 12 years growing and learning not only how to consult with clients, but also growing our staff. During that time, I was able to both live and work overseas. So I got some real great global experience and really built the foundation for where my career would continue. After that time with that company called IDX, which became part of GE Healthcare, I joined Textron, which was a multinational, multi-industry organization, really in the aerospace and high-tech manufacturing arena, where I facilitated and led programs around the globe, continuing getting sharpening that saw, learning from the leaders that I was teaching, teaching others, having people report to me, and moved into the HR consulting world for a short period of time. Got to work for an organization called PDI Ninth House, which many of the listeners will know, or many of the viewers will know, which eventually became part of Korn Ferry, and decided it was so great to be able to see both the inside as well as the outside of an organization. And then most recently, 6 years ago, I joined WinnCompanies and dove into the world of real estate development and real estate property management, which was a totally new industry for me. And at each stop, I was challenged to sort of, take a step back and either apply knowledge that I had or really take a critical look at it and figure out, how do I adapt in the new environment?
What's so interesting is all these various experiences you had. One of the key things I wanted to ask you about is something that I know all of my listeners have experienced. You are a leader yourself. You lead a team. You've worked with senior leaders across multiple industries. And I bet you there are some common things that keep them awake at night.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to talk about, what have you seen in your experience that causes the most, distress or stress for leaders?
Yeah, and Meredith, I love this question because it's so rich and candidly in the last 2 years, it shifted the focus a little bit, but I really think it can be boiled into three areas. I think the first thing that most leaders are concerned about is their product or their service. What is their organization providing to their customer base, whomever their customer base is? I think the second, and I would argue it's the most important, maybe because of my learning background, but it's the people side of the business. And really, leaders are kept up. I know I'm kept up at night about this. I know my colleagues are kept up at night about this, is keeping people in the chairs, developing people, getting people to grow, and also helping people solve that first problem, our product service problem. And then the third is, how is the organization performing? You know, as leaders, it's great that we love what we do and we're held accountable for some set of metrics, either financial or some other set of metrics, to make sure that the organization is performing where they're at. And those three kind of areas, you know, that product, service, that people, or that performance, those three areas are really what keeps leaders up at night. And yeah, there are definitely some areas below those three, but it really is, I think, can be boiled down to those three key areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. And of course, they're not isolated. There's
No.
a lot of, overlap with the concerns that may be tied in there. Thinking about there are two things I want to follow up that with. One is the impact of COVID, because you mentioned that. And so that was a whole other area that kept them awake at night. And in particular, I'm curious what you've seen in the way leaders have needed to make changes, or how have they had to grow that maybe they were sliding by in the past or getting by. But this was a wake-up call for everyone. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what did you see happening?
Yeah, another really, really insightful question. The big piece that COVID has driven is really that focus on people. See, the product and services, they don't change that much over time. Performance, whilst there were challenges around performance over the past few years, you still have to perform. I think the variable that had the most flexibility or need for resourcefulness and resilience is the people part. And frankly, I think here are some of the learnings I've had, and I know people around me have had. Number one, as leaders, we've had to communicate more. And, I love it when people say, my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in communications. And I love when people say, I know communications well. Well, communications is a huge area. And as leaders, we've had to learn to listen, and listen differently, and listen more intently. So it's been a real calling for all of us. That would be the first thing. The second thing is being able to craft short, intentional messages that have to be repeated. When you're going through a pandemic, people are worried not only about their jobs, they're worried about whatever their family is. They're worried about, frankly, bills. They're worried about food. They're worried about health. And there's so much noise going on that intentional crafting of message becomes really important.
Oh, you know what? Let me just throw in something there. You were mentioning the short, but also repeated. And, I was just reminded, when people are feeling stressed, they're not hearing everything.
No.
And some things at a given moment may not get through. And so I hadn't really thought about the importance of the repetition of messages. Like you just said, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and Meredith, when you pair that with, especially an organization like my current organization or other organizations, globally, when you operate in different places, you're also dealing with governing agencies. So, for example, mask mandates over the past 2 years, there were different rules at different times for different places, and those rules were changing. So you're not only having to give those short messages that people may or may not be hearing, because I think you so nicely put in that stress factor, right? It's changing too, and staying on top of that. And And, frankly, many team members, many employees had options of, do I go to work? Do I not go to work? Do I stay and collect unemployment? And as an organization, you need your people. I mean, the services, again, products and services are going to be there. Products and services are delivered through people. It's that common denominator.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that ties in with the other question, which I wanted to ask you around the Great Resignation, because that happened also in the midst of COVID, people leaving the workplace for a variety of reasons. But, that brings up the question, from your perspective, what is it that leaders, the organization as a whole, it falls on the executive team a lot of times, but the learning and development person like yourself also has a key role in answering the question, what can we do to keep people engaged and involved and retain the top people? We don't want to lose them. So what are some of the things that you're seeing work well to accomplish the retention issue?
Yeah. I think it comes to it's a simple statement on the surface. It's much more complex on the bottom. It's meeting team members and employees where they're at and pulling the right levers to engage them. So it's things like teaching leaders listening skills, teaching leaders how to have conversations with team members, right? It's skilling up team members. Because even though there's this great resignation going on, there are a whole group of people who do want to desperately stay with the organization. And how do you get them to see, I'm going to call it the forest through the trees? There is green grass and brown grass in every organization, candidly. And, people need to make the right decision for them. And our job as learning and development professional and executive teams is sometimes helping people to see where are those green patches of grass where you currently are. And that's that engagement trigger. How to capture the heart and mind of your team members. Is it through training? Is it through listening? Is it through, frankly, stretch assignments? Or is it through giving back and doing volunteerism as an organization?
And so I'm curious, what have you and the others there at WinnCompanies done to ask questions and learn more about, did you put a certain structure in place to have contact points with people at certain times? Because, it always boils down to people feeling valued and that their contribution matters. And so what are some of the things that that either you did or other leaders did to have that kind of connection that makes people say, I'm staying?
Yeah. So at WinnCompanies, we've done what a lot of companies have done. The first and easiest lever for me to pull as an L&D leader was we looked at our trainings, which, because of the property management industry being what it is, we had to rely on some virtual training beforehand. So we really looked at how do we shorten and make virtual training bite-sized. So we created a whole series of programs around lunch and learns and trained literally thousands of team members on that. People felt heard, they felt listened to, they felt invested in, because we were asking, what topics do you want, and turning those topics around. We also did work around surveys and said, hey, you know what? We're going to work with either target group of employees or through our annual employee engagement survey, and really, continue to give us that feedback. And then we're going to report back out. In terms of reporting back out, something we did as an organization, even prior to COVID, but we were much more intentional about it after COVID, is we started having more frequent, I'm going to call them global employee town hall meetings. If it was by division or if it was by function, but it was very deliberate. We're very blessed at WinnCompanies to have a CEO and a president of the company who is very invested in talent in our team members. And, there was a period of time that quarterly they were meeting with team members. And, at the beginning, those meetings were very well attended. like most of organizations. As time went on and people started getting used to whatever the new normal was, that cadence could break down a little bit. So again, it was, you know, tweaking training, really creating these short learning bites. It was frequency of communication. It was opening up, you know, things that sound simple, but comment boxes, either virtual or bring out the old physical boxes for team members that were still coming in the office. You know, property management's a unique industry because people live in apartment communities, so that the team members that help run those apartment communities need to be there.
Yeah.
You know, we were deemed an essential business. So many of our team members were at work every day and doing it in a safe way and telling employees, here's what we're doing for safety, showing employees, here's what we're doing for safety, answering those questions and being patient and, you know, and listening. Because people, again, you know, you said it so nicely earlier, when people are stressed, they're hearing pieces of the message rather than the whole message.
Or hearing it in a certain way
Absolutely.
that you're going, where did that come from?
Absolutely.
Because you think you're being so clear, and yet we can't control where the other person is when we're delivering our message. So I love the different things that you just described, Mo, because they speak to showing that you value them as individuals, you value their input, their opinion, and you respond to it. You know, it's one thing, companies do this all the time and make big mistakes of doing surveys, but then not sharing what the results were. And even more importantly, what are we going to do now that we have this information? Are we going to address this issue or that issue? Or, you know, just being clear about what's the next step. And I think that's part of helping people feel safe and secure, and that really cared about and cared for.
Yeah.
And that just makes such a big difference. I love all the things you mentioned that you have done.
Thanks, Meredith. And I want to build on that just for a moment, because you said something that was so key. When you talk about listening and saying, hey, what we're going to do in that sort of thing, across my career. So look, I worked in London during the London bombings in 2005, right? I was in software during Y2K and then the sort of the 2001 recession, right? During 2007, 2008, I worked in the aviation industry. And, you know, leaders, and, you know, fortunately, I've been able to watch and learn from great leaders in all of those industries, really message not only, hey, we're listening to you, tell us. Hey, here are the actions we're going to take. Let us show you. Additionally, those really good leaders, sort of those separator leaders, and frankly, building trust, is being able to confront the reality and speak candidly and say, there's some things we can't do for whatever the reason is and whatever the circumstance.
Yes.
And being able to say that, you know, we heard you, and there are some levers we'll pull and there's some levers we won't pull.
You know, people, it's so interesting to me, and this happens all the time, where a leader will withhold information for fear that it'll create problems, but the withholding creates a bigger problem. And I think folks are, you know, people like to be treated as adults. And so therefore, tell me the truth, you know, don't sugarcoat it. Let me know the reality. And then they can become creative to come up with ideas. Given this situation, you know, what might we do now instead? But when they're left with this ambiguity or lack of clarity or direction, they're left to use their imaginations to go down roads that really don't serve them or the company very well.
Yeah, well, and they end up telling themselves a story, right?
Exactly.
And you know, and it makes me think of and there are so many great thought leaders that I would love to mention all of them, but I'll mention a few right now. You know, Simon Sinek's work around start with why. You know, that kind of point of entry, what a great place to be. You know, the Ken Blanchard situational leadership 2 model, like, you know, when you're coaching employees, you're coaching different people at different career places. that's important because it helps you to, as a leader, flex your leadership muscle to meet your team or your team member wherever they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Becomes so important, using crucial conversation tools or radical candor or any of those sort of communication books, because there's so many great resources. But it's really, going to those core skills, help people understand the why, figure out where your
Yeah.
employee or your team member is in their life cycle. And yes, is it learning and development and HR's responsibility? Absolutely. Is it Jane or Joe, the manager's responsibility, or the divisional vice president responsibility? Absolutely, it is that too. And really building and using those toolkits to help.
Mm-hmm. I like the fact that you're emphasizing it really is, an organization-wide responsibility, not just on the shoulders of one person. And that takes me to another question I wanted to ask you, because you've had a responsibility to stand up a whole department. The learning and development unit didn't exist, right, when you came to WinnCompanies. And I'm thinking of people who are either entrepreneurs, starting their own company, or internally, someone who has responsibility to set up something brand new. So since you've walked that road, I would love for you to share some things that you learned. What were some successes that you had thought, wow, this could work, and it did? And what were some lessons learned that you might change if you were starting over again today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'll just list out kind of the 5 key things I learned. You have to listen. I have a lot of great experience, and so do all of the leaders that I've been touched by in my career. And it's that shared understanding, right? Celebrate those small wins. There wasn't a learning and development function per se at WinnCompanies, but there were pieces of it, and helping every time we had a win to celebrate it with the team, the whole team, right? Patience. We are, and my team laughs at me because I will go to them and say, hey, we have an opportunity. And they say, Mo, that means we have more work, and being patient with them, and really making sure that we are not trying to pull every lever or execute on everything at the same time, and knowing which one in the sequencing. And that's a big lesson in humility. And the perfect example, we launched our high potential leadership program at Win, and I was so excited. I had gotten to work with great consultants at PDI. I got to work in great industries, and I had all of these brilliant ideas. And it was like, how much sausage can you stuff into the sausage factory before the sides explode? And frankly, our first year, we stuffed too much sausage in there, which is the next leadership lesson: humility. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I'm not the best guy in the room. And sometimes it's good to be reminded of that, and then finally, just learn from those mistakes. So as we've iterated our department and our function over the years, we've learned from those mistakes, and we said, hey, look, let's try this instead, or let's tweak this. And it's really helped us to drive the function further. Perfect example right now, we're in the middle of our performance reviews for part of our business. I've been implementing performance systems for 20 years. And I've learned over the years, like, what messages to communicate, or how frequently, or, really, what are the tolerance levels of the business? Because I'm asking the business to do something. Other parts of the business are asking the business to do something, and our clients are asking, or our residents are asking. So they're having all of these asks, and we can't all just jump in and make people do things.
So I'm curious, of all the things that you've put together in terms of programs you've developed, like for high potentials, for other leaders, what are you most proud of in terms of the results that you've seen, changes you've made, development
Yeah.
of people? I think that would be really nice to give you an opportunity to share those success stories.
Yeah, I think too. And, yes, I have been sort of the driver behind it, and I've also been surrounded by really good people. So I always want to start with I'm part of a bigger puzzle, even when I'm the driver and driving it. I think the program I'm most of all of the programs I've developed, actually there are two. Um, the program here at WinnCompanies for our high potential leaders, it's taken us, and it's still not perfect. It's taken us, I'm going to call it 4 cycles of learning to really iterate it, making sure the audience is right, making sure the content is right, making sure the virtual versus the live sessions are right, learning partnerships versus mentoring. What does that look and feel like, right? What does that look and feel like? That has been a real joy, because that group, one of the results, so it's all about, numbers count at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Have we been able to do it cost effectively? Have we been able to retain talent? Have we been able to, if it's a high potential program, are those leaders being promoted? Are they, and I want to be very deliberate, because we think about, especially for those of us on this podcast that are thinking about leadership development, right? It's all about promotions. It's not only about up the ladder, it's also about across the ladder.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Especially for the listeners that have organizations that are smaller, 400 or 500,000 people. You can't have 552 vice presidents when you have a company of 600, right? So we have to think about, how do we retain and engage talent throughout.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first program, and that's been a real blessing. We've had some success with promoting people who've graduated from the program, retaining people. We have a better capture rate, or attainment rate for people that have been through the program. The other program is a program we developed at Textron. We had a first level management program, and that company loved working there, because I got to work with the leadership teams, and I got to go on the production line and see things be made.
Mm.
And those supervisors and those leaders, we modified one of the leadership development programs for that audience. And it was just awesome to see those leaders when you'd walk a production floor, or when you get an email from somebody afterwards. And even I left that organization 6 years ago to come here to WinnCompanies, and I still sometimes hear from leaders in that organization saying, you know what, you taught this class and I'm still using this idea. And I, profusely think, whatever it was, if it was an author or a concept, or if it was, transformation trilogy or the leadership pipeline, what are you going to start, stop, continue, let go of, are you individual leading yourself, or are you leading others? And just seeing people apply it. The theory is great, but when the rubber meets the road and you actually see it, it's even more exciting. I could go on for days on this one, so I'll.
Yes, no, it's such a good point, because I know where your heart is, and what you're committed to is making a difference, and having a positive impact. So it just, I'm sure, makes you feel like, yes, when you hear from somebody to say, yes, you made a difference. And it's not an ego thing. It's looking at, that's what your purpose is. That's your why, is making an impact on the lives of others, helping to create people who fulfill their potential. And so it's great to hear those success stories. And that kind of ties in with, I guess, the last thing I'd like to talk about is, well, what do you see next for you, Mo? What are you evolving into in your own career, in your own development?
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to something you just said about finding your why. And I want to start with just a very brief story. As an undergraduate, I was a performer. In undergrad, I was an a cappella singer. And I worked in the music department as well. And the department chairperson he was a prolific organist and a great music theorist. And he was at a conference. I worked at Walt Disney World. I did the Walt Disney World College program as an undergrad. And he and his wife came down and he took me to lunch. And it was a life-changing moment. And it ties to what is my why now as I'm going into the sort of next phase of my career. He took me to lunch and I was like insulted a little bit that he paid for my lunch for me. And he said, well, wait a second, look. He said, at some point, and this is, 21-year-old kid going out to lunch with the professor. He said, at some point, you're going to be sitting at this table and you're going to be sitting in my chair and you're going to be coaching someone or you're going to be helping someone develop. And he's like, you're going to give back this $20 lunch. We happen to be at the Dolphin Hotel at Walt Disney World. You're going to be at this $20 lunch and you're going to be paying that ticket. And you're going to say the same thing to that early career person. And then it's going to go on and on and on. So as I think about what's next for me, I mean, I'm so excited. I'm a lifelong learner. I've done my CPTD through the Association for Talent Development. I'm now looking into the ICF coaching credentialing. I'm looking into getting qualified at a few more assessments so that as I continue to build and learn, how can I give back to others and help them to find their why and have that lunch. Maybe it's at Walt Disney World, or maybe it's in DC, or maybe it's at, Pier 49 in San Francisco, or maybe it's at, a pub in London. And how will they play it forward too? So that's sort of where I see myself going.
That's great. Well, it's so consistent. The fact that you are a lifelong learner, that you would always be looking for ways to stretch, grow, learn more, and become, even more effective because you're acquiring more, not just information, but more skills. So you can be your best potential. And then I see that being a model for the people on your team, for the people within the whole company. Mo, this has been so fun. Thank you for sharing so much of your journey, things you've been learning, the heart that you bring to your work just comes through loud and clear. And I so admire what contributions you've made along the way in each organization you've been with, and especially, starting from scratch at WinnCompanies, and you have a right to be very proud of the programs you've put in place and the lives that you're impacting. I know many of my listeners will want to be able to connect with you and maybe even have a conversation with you. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Meredith. The best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. I love the platform. I love seeing what other great leaders are doing on that platform. So they can definitely search me on the LinkedIn platform and connect there. I'm a little slow in returning messages, but I do return them.
And on LinkedIn, you are Maurice Rondeau.
I'm Maurice
correct?
Rondeau, CPTD.
Okay, great. And we will have that link on your show notes page for your interview. And I just want to thank you again for being who you are in the world and being a guest on my show. I appreciate it and you.
Thanks for this opportunity, Meredith. It was great. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.